Start?
All right.
So, good morning, everybody. I'm super excited to have Rob Pardo, the man here. But more, I'm very excited for a very specific reason also. One is I've been to a lot of Unites, and a lot of talks are about code, APIs, SDKs. Great. I love code. But I worked on my own in games, and I worked in large studios at games. And when I worked on my own, one thing I learned very fast, I'm a tech guy. I'm not a designer. Everybody who saw my own personal games had a good laugh. And there's a reason why. I have no skills on game design or art. But if you compare game industry with writing books, with Unity, we make words, and we provide words. There's somebody who writes a book, who makes actually the book by using the words, making sometimes new words up. And that's Rob Pardo. Rob Pardo wrote several amazing books. World of Warcraft. It's one of his biggest books he wrote ever. His latest book, Hearthstone, is a phenomenal book. You should read it. That's why it excites me to have Rob here to change Unite. Change Unite, that it's not just about pure APIs, SDKs, but about sharing his storage, giving advice. What is good game design? What makes it something interesting? What is a story? A game is a story. And that excites me to open Unite now of helping our community to be successful. As JR said, it's about democratization, solving hard problems, but also being successful at making a game. Making games is the APIs, the SDK, but also the story you bring in there. And we talked about even advertising, but the storyline is still what people will play the game for. People may come for the beauty, shiny PBS shader you put in there, but people only stay because of the story. And that is what I'm interested in to learn more about from Rob. So, there's 2 microphones. Feel free to run up, steal the microphone, keep the microphone in the room, and ask questions to Rob. If you want to start off, Rob and I can start off with a few questions too. But feel free to go up for questions. Is there anybody who have a burning question you want to go up? Go up.
It's always tough to be the first person.
I get very nervous in front of the mic, sorry. So, I've been a great fan of Blizzard. It consumes all my gaming time, many years. So this is the thing. When I started playing World of Warcraft, I feel like, oh my God, I'm going to play this game until the last expansion because they say that they're going to be until level 100. It's going to be like 5 expansions, like it's a set of defined, and you can imagine as a fan, the story is going to be like from this, and it's going to evolve into that, and you are expecting to see the story evolve. Now, I understand that it's a franchise, and the industry don't want to kill a franchise like that. I feel the same with Metal Gear Solid, I feel the same with a lot of games, Resident Evil, that we have a story, and I feel at some point they don't want just to end the story because every story, at my point of view, have a beginning and an end. And yes, there could be like, oh, something happened and the world is being destroyed again and everything like. But how do you feel when you say like you have a storyline defined and somebody on the corp tells you like, we cannot end the story? Or how does this work? What can you tell me about this?
I think, every game and every game franchise is a little bit different as far as how they might handle the storylines. World of Warcraft, we had always made it to be endless. I guess to draw the parallel, it's a big persistent world, it's a big online world. What's the story of Earth, right? Is there a beginning, middle, and end? I think we hope not. We hope that it just keeps on going on and on and on, right? And I think that's much more the approach we took with like World of Warcraft, was that it's a universe that we created that can just have infinite stories. You know, it's like a comic book franchise. You know, it's a TV series. You know, I'm sure eventually it will end, but it'll probably eventually end because there's just maybe not enough players that are interested in living in that world any longer. But like if you go to the RTS franchise, you know, Warcraft 1, 2, and 3, you know, I think that one is much more handled a little more like a traditional storyline where we really try to make sure the story is self-contained within that game. And the thing I think, one of the many things that I think is great about Blizzard is Blizzard's in a position now where they don't have to continue their franchises. You know, it's almost all self-directed. So, you know, I know right now there's, you know, a lot of fans that want to see Warcraft 4 and they want to see that storyline continue. But what it would really take is for a team inside of Blizzard to really want to take up that gauntlet and do it. And, you know, if they want to do other things like Overwatch or some of the other games they have in development, then they'll choose to do that. And once they feel creatively it's the right time, maybe they would revisit a different story. But I do think like World of Warcraft and online worlds are a very different kind of beast.
I just feel like that happened to every story. Like they want to continue and get new content, and sometimes you, as a fan, you say like, I just want to see the end of the story. Like it doesn't make sense. Like Resident Evil, there are like 12 games over there, and say like, I was just expecting to Umbrella Corporation get to an end. World of Warcraft, I was expecting the world at some point to be happy, and I feel like sometimes the stories are get like, if you've tried to finish a story being on the point of view like, I'm going to finish the story when I have no players left or when I'm not selling, I don't think you're going to reach, because at that point it's not going to be, it's not going to have sense like make another game, because you're not going to have players. Why not finish a story in that epic way? Like I just plan this story is going to finish with a great ending, because you know like, you fight so hard to finish these guys, and then you didn't achieve your goal because you left something over there that everything goes bad again.
Well, I mean, like I said, I just would separate the idea of like an MMO, a persistent world that really isn't made to have an ending, from a game or a game franchise that, yeah, they do kind of have these big culmination and big conclusion events. But with WoW, I think, you know, it very much is kind of made so there can be more and more stories, and you know, always can exist in the world as long as they can come up with cool stuff. You know, as long as, you know, it's like to use a different parallel, movies versus TV. Like movies, I think track much more to kind of what you're talking about, where sometimes we see franchises that make too many movies, and you're like, oh, I just wish they would have ended with the first Matrix. Did we really need the next two, right?
Yeah, this is.
So I get what you're saying, but I think when you look at like TV, it's a little bit more like an MMO where you're going to have a lot of seasons. You know, and most TV series are not made knowing there's only going to be 4 seasons or 5 seasons. You know, it's like a lot of them are made that, you know, the writers have to be inspired and they're always trying to innovate and they're trying to keep the audience that they have, but still kind of widen it out. And some TV series last for 20 plus years and are still really engaging. And some, you know, that maybe the writers didn't, you know, keep it fresh and they had to end the series after a few years. And I think that's much more of how I would draw the analogy to an MMO. So.
I have another question.
Go back in the line.
Yeah.
Well, so I have a 2-part question. One is, what's your approach to creating new IPs? And when you are creating that new IP, how much planning do you do before it's overkill? And you know, you wait to see how the IP does before, you know, doing even more writing or, you know, looking at expansions.
That's a big question. I think at Blizzard, I mean, first of all, I'm going to separate 2 types of IP. So there's IP, which might be like a new universe in a new world. And then I think it's IP that's just a new game. So for example, I think generally in the industry, people might look at Hearthstone as a new IP because it's a new expression of the Warcraft IP. But you know, we already had the Warcraft world, so that made it a little bit easier in some ways. But honestly, I mean, you know, like Overwatch is going to be the first new Blizzard IP in, I think, 15-ish years, because Warcraft, Diablo, and StarCraft came pretty early on in the history, and then really Blizzard was able to continue to make games within those worlds and kind of make those worlds bigger and bigger and bigger. But if you're talking about kind of like world IP, you know, like Overwatch is a new IP and Hearthstone is not, It really, I think, just starts with, kind of the creative leads at Blizzard and the art department, I think, are the places where we look at it the most. Like going back to, let's say, StarCraft, a lot of that is just, the really awesome, amazing artists that Blizzard has, and they just will sketch and draw and come up with cool stuff. And then, their executive in charge of story and lore is Chris Metzen, and he's just awesome at imagination and coming up with new ideas. So it's kind of this combination of just frenzy of new art and new ideas. And I think out of that, we start kind of thinking about, what's the game within it, and then the ideas start going both directions. And then you'll start having game designers that might have an idea for a mechanic or something that they want to do, and then the artist will, kind of riff off that and start creating a mechanic. So it's very much just kind of this creative cauldron. Blizzard's not really a company that's like all about like planning. I think it's much more that creative process, and the right ideas kind of come to the top. So. And then there's, and then when you're talking about, let's say, something more like a Hearthstone, I mean, every project within Blizzard has its own unique story. Like, there's definitely not really a process that we follow, because a lot of it's really born out of that team. And, I think it's much more team focused, and the creation of that team and making sure that team's successful and has the right programmers and the right artists and the right designers and the right leadership. And I think, that's kind of, the process kind of becomes theirs to a certain extent. Like, I could sit here all day and tell you like the story of how Hearthstone was created or World of Warcraft, but the thing is, we never really came up with something that's like, okay, now the next team can just follow that again and make a great game. Because the thing I've kind of learned in the industry is the next game I make is going to be the hardest one, because it actually, once you have success and you've done a bunch of cool stuff, it actually doesn't get any easier. You have to keep on being committed and learn new things, because sometimes the things you did last time aren't going to work the next time.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick rhetorical question here. Who plays Hearthstone? Just want to make sure.
Well, I'm sure the audience self-selected for this particular talk, so I hope.
Hey, Rob. You kind of touched on this a little bit in the last question, but is there, where do you begin? And is there anything the rest of us could kind of learn from that?
I mean, like on a project?
Yeah. Or with an idea or a new IP or anything?
Yeah, I guess, so kind of going back to a little bit of the last answer, I think, you can begin a project and begin something with a lot of different ideas. For me personally, oftentimes it comes around some sort of mechanic or world that I might want to see or be excited about. I mean, World of Warcraft is a really simple one because, MMO games had been kind of around for maybe 5 or 6 years. Ultima Online had been out there. EverQuest, I think we were playing EverQuest when we were working on Brood War, actually. So we started getting involved in that, and then Dark Age of Camelot came out, and we just saw so much potential with the genre, and we really felt like there was an opportunity there and something we could do a lot better. And, the game, kind of a lot of those game mechanics really inspired us. And we had this really awesome IP in Warcraft that was already there. So that one was a fairly obvious place, and I think if you look at the industry, there's a fair amount of games out there that are inspired by other games. And then, it becomes this very subjective thing of, well, are they a clone or are they driving the industry forward? And I feel like that's just this subjective argument you see hashed out in, rooms all over the place, with gamers or Comic-Cons or on the press. And then when you start thinking about, I don't know, feature ideas, like you get below the game level and you start thinking about features, it's like I get inspired from kind of everything, and oftentimes inspired by things that are not necessarily in the genre that I'm making something in, because I find oftentimes some of the most interesting ideas are in different genres, or might even be in different entertainment. Like one good example is when we're making like campaigns for like Warcraft III or StarCraft Brood War or StarCraft II and things like that, we often will have like these ideas that we get from movies. So there might be something like we see the 300 and then we're like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if there was a mission where you only had like a limited number of units and you had to survive for 30 minutes and see if you could do it, and it's really epic, and like that would spawn a whole mission. right? So I think a lot of times we're very inspired by kind of the other creative kind of industries.
Excellent. Thank you.
So I see a lot playing. When we travel, I can guarantee you, Rob plays a lot of games. But what is like for you, like the recent mobile games that inspired you, like gave you new ideas, like, okay, maybe later on I will inspire that in my next game?
Yeah, I don't know if it always works entirely like that. You know, it's more like I just try to immerse myself in whatever the game is, and then what will happen is when I want to make something new or be involved in something, that it's almost like you have this back catalog and archive of stuff that you've kind of played, seen, read, watched, things like that.
And what is it, like, I'm not talking about the big games, but like what games you currently play mobile that not the Hearthstone, but
I mean, right now, like, I haven't been, you know, a lot of the mobile games I'll just play for a little bit and then kind of move on to other stuff. Like the long-standing ones I've been playing is, you know, I've always really liked strategy games. You know, I made a bunch of strategy games, so, you know, I'm playing a lot of the build and battle games right now. But, you know, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of differentiation in that space, you know, other than, you know, kind of have Clash of Clans, then you got all the other games that kind of looks a lot and smells a lot like Clash of Clans. And then I think there's other interesting games. Like one of the things I love about the indie scene is there's always these really interesting mechanics or really interesting ideas, you know. So, you know, like something I've been playing recently, it's not on mobile, but it's PC, is Invisible Ink from Clay. You know, I think those guys are really awesome and come up with cool stuff. And also been playing Don't Starve Together lately with my son, so that's been fun. You know, like you can kind of see even with the talk I did the other day, you know, Agario is another game I've been kind of more fascinated with. Like personally, I'm still a huge fan of Hearthstone. Like now I'm outside of Blizzard, so I'm just a fan.
well,
So
I've
now,
seen it.
Yeah, so now I get to, when I have lunch with all my friends that are on the Hearthstone team, I get to act like a fan and just ask them questions about what they're doing next. So.
Wow, this is a big change from.
I know.
Yeah.
Me again. I don't have a clear idea how to ask this. I would like to know, like, what's your point of view? Like, how do you see gamers, bots, and online gaming, all the online gaming? Like right now, everything is online. So how do you see these people? Like, these people are your customers too, but they are cheating. They are pissing off your other customers. So, but I don't see like companies do like a lot for hunting them. Like, what do you?
I don't know if that's true, actually. I mean, I know from a Blizzard point of view, we took that stuff very seriously, and we're always trying to figure out how to deal with hackers or exploiters or griefers or, you know, any of those types of things. It's, you know, depending on your game mechanics and your technology, it can be a really challenging problem. But I actually think almost all the companies I know of, at least, you know, care very deeply about their online communities and try to deal with a lot of this stuff. But some of the problems are just really tricky. You know, like one example might be something like loss botting. Like when you're designing the game, you don't really imagine the idea that someone's going to design an AI that purposely just loses over and over again to tank their rating, or, you know, maybe end up facing other loss bots so they get like these incremental wins, but enough people are doing it so suddenly it actually becomes a thing. It's like how, you know, it's not really easy to stop something like that, you know. And then there's other, you know, but when it comes to, let's say, I don't know, like map hacking and RTSs, or it comes to teleport hacking in World of Warcraft, I mean, you know, we put tons of programmers on doing our best to solve that problem. You know, I know Riot is really interested in trying to make, you know, their, you know, the toxicity in their community a lot less, you know, so they actually have all kinds of interesting stuff like the Tribunal and all these experiments that they're doing. So I think actually a lot of companies do care about it. It's just, you know, if you have a big online world or online game, it means you have a lot of players and, you know, you have a lot of activity, and, you know, it's not, I don't know, it's that different than, you know, I don't know, look at professional sports and you look at cheating and exploiting and how people try to get an edge, and, you know, it's, when you're in like these competitive games, you know, people are going to try to do that. But I think the companies try pretty hard to deal with it.
Thank you.
How you doing? You kind of talked about this yesterday and a little bit just a little while ago. Looking forward in the future, I mean, mobile's kind of democratized gameplay. We can play anywhere. So what are some future mechanics or your thought on future mechanics where we still get the tabletop kind of environment where I can play with my friends or we can all work towards a mission together, but I need to jump in and out in a casual manner? So what are some of those mechanics that you see towards the future, or maybe you're thinking about with the evolution of gameplay?
I mean, I think with mobile, we're still trying to discover like what are good mobile games, and I feel like a lot of the games in mobile right now, even though they're obviously on a mobile device, they're not necessarily really multiplayer online. Like there's a lot of using asynchronous sort of techniques to make games work, and I think it's really interesting, all the asynchronous stuff, but I gotta think that you're gonna start seeing more people try to make synchronous games. Like I think before we made Hearthstone, there was really this thinking that you can't be successful in mobile with a game that requires a 10-minute session length and a connection to another player to do it. Like that was one of the things that people just were calling us out on and saying that wasn't going to succeed. And it has succeeded. And I think there's a lot more opportunity for deeper games on mobile than are currently out there. I kind of have this analogy where I don't know how there's all these definitions, hardcore, midcore, I have no idea what they all mean. But what I do know is there's I think something like 90 million monthly unique players in League of Legends these days. And there's a lot of other big online games like League of Legends with sometimes tens of millions of players that are playing them. So let's just be conservative and say there's at least 100 to 150 million pretty hardcore gamers, because League of Legends is a pretty hardcore game, right? And these are the types of gamers that would actually probably go out and buy a new console if there was one game that they really wanted to play on it. And the thing about all these people is that they all have mobile devices. And I know that gamers are actually device agnostic, like we'll play on anything, but the problem is there's just not any games to play on the mobile device for this particular audience, because I feel like a lot of the games continue to chase kind of the Candy Crushes of the world or the Clash of Clans of the world. So I think you're going to see a lot more, so I'm hopeful at least that you're going to see more hardcore, midcore, whatever mechanics, but I think the real challenge is not with the technology or the mobile device or can you stay connected. I think the challenge is coming up with enough games that work really well for a touch interface, because I think you're seeing even when people try to bring over these hardcore games, they might be designed really well for like a mouse and keyboard sort of input device, or they might be really good for gamepad, but they don't work as well with a touch. So I think that's us as game designers. We have to come up with what are the new game genres that excel with a touch interface rather than like a mouse and keyboard interface. So,
cool. Thank you.
Hey, I wanted to ask you about the water cooler problem, which you talked about the other day. So I'm working on designing a game right now that has linear progression, so a later player can't really be matched up with an earlier player. And the ability to both sort of randomly create a team that's a long-lived team as well as do it with your friends. So we're looking at a lot of design issues we're trying to figure out, which is the water cooler problem, which is like if I'm 3 levels in and I want to match with my friend all of a sudden and they're somewhere else, what do I do? So I just was curious if you had ideas or processes for sort of circumventing that or maybe manipulating the design to make that work.
There's a lot of games that have tried to tackle that. Obviously I have to know a lot more of the specifics around your game, but the thing I've probably seen the most is some sort of like sidekicking or mentoring sort of system where either you boost them up to the other players or the higher level players go down, so that's the most obvious thing that I've seen that, can work pretty well. Generally, I would probably be a bigger fan of the sidekicking, like the move somebody up, because I think stuff like that's interesting. So I think, first of all, I think the higher level players that have earned their progression don't really like to be pushed down. So even if they're gaining experience or progression at that, play down with their friends, it kind of feels icky, and I think it disincentivizes them from doing it. And then in return, you have the lower level player, which probably is a little excited. It's like, oh, I can't wait to play with my friends tonight because I'm going to get boosted higher, and I'm going to play with a couple of extra abilities that maybe I didn't have before. So I generally think that's a good direction to go. And then you just have to make sure, like, whenever you do these side-kicking mentoring systems, you have to be really careful with the balance of how you earn progression, because assuming that, you know, if I'm playing every night at my normal level, you know, maybe I'm getting X amount of progression. What you want to be really careful of is if, let's say, I'm doing some sort of side-kicking or mentoring system, that my progression isn't, let's say, Y, or X plus something, or X minus something. You really want to make sure that the progression feels the same, so you're not incentivizing this weird behavior where I want a sidekick because I get extra progression, or, you know, or worse, I don't want to like sidekick at all because I don't want to stop my own progression.
So you think it's bad to incentivize sidekicking?
No, I don't think it's necessarily bad. You just have to be careful that you don't over-incentivize it, unless that's something you really want in kind of your meta. I mean, there could be reasons there, like maybe people are having a hard time with the progression, so you actually do want to over-incentivize the sidekicking. But you just got to be careful with that level curve, because players are going to go for the path of least resistance, and it could get a little weird in your community if people are hunting down other people to be their sidekicks. So generally, if you do want to incentivize it, you might want to do it in an asymmetrical way with like a different axis of progression, that maybe there's something you can earn from sidekicking somebody 10 times or something like that. But I would keep that core leveling curve as balanced as possible between the two.
Cool, thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask a quick question. When I compared it as a book writer, and you've been 17 years, a lot of years was writing books basically for PC. And
Keep on using that analogy. I'm not a very good writer, but go ahead.
And then you became in the mobile. The last game was mobile. Is that a different person? Is it for you different designers that you would hire?
No.
Or is it this, you consider, there's a certain transition?
I think game design very easily crosses platforms. Like I really don't. I mean, each platform has its uniqueness to it,
yes.
And I certainly think experience helps. Like, you know, if you've been designing a console and you kind of understand, you know, cameras and game pads and things like that, I mean, that helps. I mean, the experience matters, but ultimately, when I think of just like core game design sort of systems and things, I think that ports across pretty easily across different platforms, unless you're a specialist. You know, like you might have someone that's a 3D FPS level designer, and that's what they've worked on for the last 10 years. I mean, they might struggle suddenly being put on something like Hearthstone, but if I'm just kind of talking about like game mechanic designers, you know, I think what matters in some ways more than the games they've worked on is the games that they play, because like most of the really good game designers I know, as long as they really understand a genre at a really deep level, even if they've never worked in it, they can usually be pretty successful if they start working in that new genre.
And at Blizzard, was it a big change for also like going from PC to mobile?
I mean, it wasn't. I mean, Blizzard's a really big company now. I mean, it's not like the entire company is like, oh, we're focusing on mobile. I mean, if anything, Hearthstone was a little more experimental. Yeah. So it's not like it's really shifted the company in any particular direction. It's just kind of adding another axis to what they're doing. And even to go back to your previous point, you know, the game director on Hearthstone, like that wasn't my design. You know, I was the exec producer. So the game director, Eric Dodds, all of his experience had been on World of Warcraft. Like he was originally when we were working together on WoW, he was primarily responsible for like user interface and trade skills and a variety of other kind of systems. So, you know, all of his talent points, if you will, were, you know, put in the MMO basket. Hearthstone was his first mobile game, his first free-to-play game, and his first, you know, card battling game. But, you know, like him and the rest of the team, they loved Magic the Gathering. They loved the genre. You know, I think that they did pretty well for their first game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, so like when a new type of gameplay system comes out or a new device comes out, there's always this hurdle of overcoming the technical limitations of the device first. Like early online games like EverQuest, like there was no instancing of dungeons, so you had these trains of the zone lines, you had these necros, you had the monk, you know, doing ready checks of fate death and then killing everybody in the group.
You sing it, brother.
I think I may have killed you once on Nameless server in Lower Deck by accident.
You were on the Nameless?
Yeah.
How funny. The old days.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm a VR developer. I'm I look at VR right now, and like the early days of 3D, like everybody didn't know how to work a camera system. So like on like the early days of network multiplayer, like you had all these limitations. So how do you design around these limitations of these devices?
I mean, that's a very broad question, obviously. You know,
Like what's like the core designs that you take when you're looking at a new piece of hardware device?
I mean, honestly, I mean, even if it's not technology, even if it's art or whatever, I mean, I'm a big believer in constraints make you more creative. You know, I think that's actually in a lot of ways what drives our industry is because you have these constraints and you're figuring out how to work around them, and it kind of reduces the problem space, you know. Like I've definitely seen different designers that I've worked with in the past, and the designers that I really enjoy working with are the ones that are kind of MacGyvers. You know, it's like, you know, this tool doesn't quite do what I want it to do, but I figure out a workaround to do what I want, you know, make happen, and they'll kind of thrive within that environment. And then I've seen other designers that, you know, their feature or their level will never be, they can't make it right until they get that other feature that's developed by the art team or by the programming team. So I think it's more of a mindset. You know, even going back to some of the EverQuest stuff, some of those things were definitely constraints. You know, like I think server sharding and things like that, instancing or the lack thereof was a design choice. So that's the other thing that I think sometimes happens. You know, I remember when we decided to do instancing and WoW, and you know, I talked to a lot of the EverQuest guys, and they're just like, oh, it's gonna make the world not feel like a community anymore, and you know, there was a lot of kind of these high-level design vision reasons for why they didn't think that was gonna work.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my question's kind of specific, and feel free to say you weren't around for those discussions or didn't hear anything, but I was curious about whether you heard anything around different meetings or the water cooler or whatnot about the decision to, you know, not include the Necromancer from Diablo 2 in like any more Blizzard IP almost anywhere. I think it was one of the most like iconic and stylized characters, and my favorite, and a lot of the guys I talked to, their favorite as well. And a lot of people were, you know, disappointed it wasn't included in Diablo 3, and then there still hasn't been any mention about it in Heroes of the Storm. I was just wondering if you heard anything, like there was a conscious decision. There
was definitely not a conscious decision. So, like, to talk a bit about maybe Diablo 3, just to illustrate the point, is, you know, when we first started working on Diablo 3, I think there's a desire to do almost all new classes. The only reason the Barbarian really came across is because, like, Jay, you know, the game director, like, he's, you know, he always likes to joke, he likes the smashy classes. You know, the classes, you know, has like a statue of the Hulk, and, you know, that's kind of one of the things he really enjoys. And it didn't really seem like there was another archetype that was as cool as the Barbarian. But in general, kind of the desire for Diablo 3 was to reinvent all those classes. Now, some of them are much closer than others, you know, with the Wizard and the Sorceress, so there were some that are, you know, closer there. But it was really just wanting to come up with new kits, and I think the closest thing to the Necromancer was clearly the Witch Doctor, right? And that was very conscious, but it wasn't anything to do with the Necromancer. You know, it was, I think, there's still a love for those creepy undead sorcerers within, you know, within Blizzard. So
that
yeah.
run he had with the knife and the hair behind, it was great.
So, you know, and so, you know, we had him in Warcraft 3, and, you know, they creep all over the World of Warcraft universe. So, you know, so it's just, they have so much IP now. You know, there's so many different characters and so many heroes across so many games. Like, I'm sure one day if Heroes of the Storm continues to be really, really successful, I wouldn't be surprised if eventually they put a Necromancer in there. But yeah, there was no conscious decision to get rid of them.
Thanks.
Hello.
Hello.
So given the longevity and popularity of Blizzard's games, how much did you play the own games that Blizzard had created, and do you have a favorite Hearthstone card or class?
One of the best things about working at Blizzard is the fact that we get to work on games that we actually enjoy playing during development and after development. So yeah, I mean, every game that I've worked on at Blizzard, I played as a player for years after release. You know, like even going all the way back to like StarCraft. You know, I remember when StarCraft was out, that I had this lunch group with a couple of my friends on the team, and we would every day play like 2 or 3 lunch missions, on Hunters or Lost Temple or something like that, and we'd come up with strategies and how we're going to team together. And then after Brood War, it'd be like, okay, well, I'm going to play the Protoss player and get a Dark Archon, and you guys will send me some of your peons as soon as you can, and then protect me, and I'll build out all 3 races. We'd do that for years, playing games like that. And then same thing with World of Warcraft. I'd go in and out of, am I going to be in a raiding guild, or am I just going to play more casually? And then with Hearthstone, it's like I still probably play Hearthstone about an hour a day, and I kind of go back and forth between constructed play and arena, and now Tavern Brawl. As far as favorite Hearthstone classes, it's not so much the classes as much as the decks. I kind of like the decks that are a little more control, a little bit more probably top heavy, a little more interesting decks. I don't really like base hunters or kind of these really rush aggro decks, and it's not because I think they're unbalanced or anything like that. I actually, when I was designing RTS games, I was always a big protector of the rush sort of strategies, because I think they're important. It's just as a player, I'm just less interested, because I feel like it really ramps up the randomness of the game. Because I feel like if you're playing a face hunter or you're playing against a face hunter, it's it really shines a spotlight on what happens if you don't get a good draw. And I'd rather games that go a little bit longer, that slowly kind of diminish the role of randomness in the overall game.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. So I play StarCraft II casually, and one of the reasons that I do that instead of, say, League of Legends is just the quality of social interaction that I'm likely to receive while I'm playing. Like if I'm playing StarCraft, the other player is much more likely to be like polite to me or friendly than put me down or be rude.
Who would have thought that people would say that about BattleNet?
I mean, But I was wondering if you could comment on some of the decisions that you think Blizzard made that kind of, fostered that in the community, or if you think it's just the crux that is the difference between the competitive versus like competitive cooperative gameplay.
I think it's the difference between games more than anything else. I wish online gaming communities were just nicer in general, but to even stretch even further, like World of Warcraft, I think even more so is a friendlier environment. And I think it's the game mechanics that do it more than anything else. The problem with League of Legends and some of the things I know they've been trying to solve with Heroes is more through the game mechanics, which is, so League of Legends, it's a team-based competitive game, and you're going to play with teammates that you may not know. And the thing is, like in StarCraft, I feel like if you have teammates, they could hurt you, but they can't really actively make the enemies better, right? So even if you get a bad teammate, you're probably less mad at them than your teammate in League of Legends that just fed the enemy hero that now just killed you, right? So I think it's really those types of mechanics. So in StarCraft 2, even if you're playing against someone and they're kind of a jerk or whatever, it's that more normal sort of kind of interaction versus your teammate is yelling at you for being a jerk or not being very good or things like that. And I just feel like it just ramps that up so much more. And then you look at, let's say, Hearthstone, which I do think they very actively worked on mechanics, right? So there's no chatting with your enemy, and that was a conscious choice to try to deal with what you're talking about. But I think usually it's more the game mechanics that cause that more than anything else, unless they did some conscious things. Like again, World of Warcraft did the same thing. We didn't allow you to chat with the opposing side.
So not actually pitting teammates against each other?
And it's hard, right? Because you want to rely on each other,
right.
But when it gets into that competitive situation, I think it just ramps up the intensity of the whole thing. Versus, let's say, playing expert mode on Left 4 Dead. You're still playing against an AI, so it keeps everything much more friendly. Even if it's expert mode and your teammate just blasts you with a shotgun from behind, you're probably not going to go too crazy on them, because it's not like you're losing to an opposing side. You lost to a bunch of zombies. Okay, let's start over again.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, so in the past you had mentioned that MMO had kind of become a dirty word, and you used the example.
I love how that stuff gets picked up sometimes. Maybe these offhand comments, and suddenly it's like.
Well, so I actually agreed that I thought that you used an example as I think Destiny, of saying they're basically
they didn't want to call it
things,
yeah.
but they're. But I think in mobile, we've started to see a trend where there's a lot more games and developers that are identifying or embracing the MMO tag. And I was wondering if you had any comments on if that's a good thing or if...
You know, I mean, I think anytime when you're talking about labels and genres and things like that, it's all about expectation.
Yeah.
So, and that's where I really was coming from with that, is that, you know, dirty word isn't exactly the right word. I guess what I was really just trying to say is MMO had become so kind of conceptually packed in with World of Warcraft, like they are starting to become synonymous, that, you know, people, the expectations start defining the word in the game. And that's what I was trying to say with Destiny, you know, but words can get reclaimed, and, you know, you get enough other games that are starting to call themselves MMOs, it starts changing the expectation again. It's just something that I was kind of looking at as kind of this trend. But it's, you know, I still think it's very tricky. Like, to me, I mean, MMO, it's like, what does it say? Massively multiplayer online, right? That's all that says. And even if you say MMO and you don't say MMO RPG, people automatically still attach the RPG because, you know, most of the MMOs we've seen have been RPG based, you know? You know, and then what's the difference between that versus a persistent world? Or let's say a game that has persistent to it, but you're only ever in a match with, you know, a few players. Is that an MMO? Or, you know, it's like, I feel like we lack good vocabulary to describe all the different sorts of online games that are now being made.
Yep.
And I don't know why, but I think as an industry, we're not great at labeling things. Like, we always use these acronyms, and you know, I feel like that's something that, you know, it's always great when we come up with new ways to kind of explain things. But I think it all comes down to the expectations, because more so than ever before, you know, we have this discoverability problem, and we have this wealth of content out there, and we're struggling with ways of how do we talk about our games so that it gives the right expectations. It excites people, but it doesn't give them this false expectation that when they play it, that, you know, the game didn't meet it.
Do you have any personal expectation about, like, your experience on working with MMOs that you think that, like, mobile hasn't fully embraced yet or gone in that? Like, is there something that some mobile games out there could do a better job of kind of reaching your expectation of what an MMO could be?
I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunities for MMO games on mobile, for sure. I mean, you know, you have a device that's inherently online, right? So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting sorts of MMO mechanics that we'll eventually uncover on mobile that might not even be able to exist in other places. You know, but it's really, you know, I'd like to see more synchronous gameplay ideas, you know, which I know is, again, that blasphemy in the industry, but to me, the thing I love the most about MMOs is being able to play, you know, the game with other people and having that sense. And there's definitely some games that have done that. It's just, but I wouldn't say it's common.
Right.
You know?
So something like beyond, I think Game of War feels like the one that's getting the most
because of the whole
for being an MMO, but they could go a lot further with, you know, communicating with players and making combat more interesting, that kind of stuff. But cool.
But I mean, you know, there's other games, like there's this game Spirit Lords I played where you can actually play with other people and you see it. That's probably the game that made me feel the most like it was an MMO for mobile, because you actually see other players and you kind of have that feeling you get in like a UO or a, you know, WoW.
Cool.
So
awesome. Thank you.
So this room is also multiplayer. There's 2 microphones. Let's just take a question from the back quick.
My question is pretty simple. I'm curious why the development team on Hearthstone chose to use Unity, because at the time that development started, Unity would have been pretty small, I think. So I'm curious why was there just a champion in the design team who was like, we got to use this, it's amazing. I mean, especially for a company like Blizzard, who no doubt has the resources to create anything that they need for a project like that.
Yeah, so there's a couple reasons. First of all, when the project was originally started, it wasn't on Unity. It was going to be internal tech, just like we had done on other games. But there's a couple factors. One was the team was always meant to be very small. So Hearthstone was, you know, a bit of an experimental project within the studio, you know, and we really didn't want to, because there was a lot of, I don't know, let's call it questions, maybe a certain amount of disbelief that, you know, we should be doing a card battling game. Sure. You know, is mobile going to be big enough? Does it make sense for Blizzard? You know, a lot of those types of things. So one of the ways it kind of was this project that we were experimenting with, prototyping, and got a little bit bigger. But there's always kind of going to be this limit of no more than 15 developers. So that does limit a little bit of what we're willing to build for it. But we were actually doing internal tech. And then about halfway through the project or so, the rendering programmer ended up leaving to go someplace else. And we had to make a choice. Like, okay, well, do we hire someone else to take over that person's code and finish it? Which I'm sure most programmers here are not very excited about taking somebody else's code base over and making it happen. So we knew it would probably turn into a reboot on the rendering. So it ended up being this really great opportunity to go, you know what? Is that something that's important to this project? I mean, we'd actually had a Flash prototype up and running for a long time, and the game designers have been working on it, and it's getting pretty fun. So did we really want to kind of start over on the rendering technology? So we looked at all the engines at that particular time, and decided to go with Unity for a variety of reasons.
It's a very wise decision.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
So you've had a long-standing relationship with Blizzard that's led to a lot of success. Are there any characteristics or aspects, components of that company that you could identify as particulars that led to that or that enabled that success?
A lot of things, really. I mean, but I think the focus has always been on the quality of not just obviously the games and the products, but also the people, and just not being compromising. I mean, I did this talk with Mike Morheim and Frank Pierce at DICE, I don't know, like 8 years ago or something, and it was kind of fun because we talked a lot about the history of Blizzard and talked about, we actually talked a lot about the games that no one had ever heard of. And Mike made this kind of interesting point where he felt like Blizzard didn't necessarily have a much better hit rate than maybe some of the other big studios out there. The difference was that we could identify what were the things that were not going to be great for us and kill them, even at great cost, and be it, actual cost or be it kind of in the community. Like I know famously, we'd canceled StarCraft Ghost, we'd canceled Warcraft Adventures, but there was a bunch of other games that had never even made it to the announcement point that maybe even had a year of development or more in it that we'd killed. And I think it's easy now to look at Blizzard and go, okay, well, yeah, Blizzard's really big, they can do that. But Blizzard wasn't always big. I mean, it wasn't always well funded. I mean, but that was always there, that kind of uncompromising quality and willing to push back against our publisher or whoever it was. So I think that was probably one of the most important key things. And then over time, it's just, having really great people and having a culture where people wanted to stay there, So I know that for me, a lot of my kind of the middle part of my Blizzard career was building out the game design department. And so when I started there, I think there's maybe a couple of us that actually had designer on their business card, because it was that age of the industry where designers really weren't a standalone job yet. A lot of times it was just kind of done by the engineers on the team. And then when one of the founders left, who was the other big kind of design proponent at the studio, I was suddenly over StarCraft II and World of Warcraft by myself as kind of a high-level designer, and then I had a bunch of some mid-level guys and a bunch of junior guys, and it's like, okay, I'm kind of screwed. I'm gonna have to figure out how to build out a design department. So I really spent, a good 7+ years, kind of the middle part of my career, trying to figure all that out. And, what is it like to bring, experienced designers from other studios and kind of make them Blizzard, and how do I take the guys that I have now and make them better, and really having a focus on developing your people and having people that work well together and things like that.
Excellent, thank you.
Who's playing his card?
You guys have been in line longer than me. Go ahead.
Thanks. All right, to further the last question, Blizzard has had a pretty uncanny knack at reinventing genres and making them their own with MMOs and RTS and stuff like that. There's also been a lot of talk lately of the indie apocalypse on Gama Sutra and stuff like that. And that's what it takes, is reinventing existing ideas with new mechanics and very condensed gameplay. What is your take on Indie Apocalypse 1 and 2? What is your advice for a starting studio to really stand out, and Steam opening up the green light process and that sort of thing, and just a flood of new content coming out?
So you're gonna have to help me out the first one. So what do you mean by Indie Apocalypse?
Okay, so on Game of Sutra, there's several articles with, with people both complaining and defending the Steam Greenlight process opening up, saying that there's a glut of content that's a little sub-quality and that sort of thing. And how do you stand out, as a budding indie developer in that sort of way?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been close enough to all the Steam stuff to really understand that whole dynamic, so I'm going to be, so excuse me if I say anything that's ignorant about it, because I'm not real knowledgeable, but I guess with that, and also just with, the democratization of game development and all this, it's really allows a lot more people to make games, and a lot more people to publish games. It reminds me a little bit, I guess, of mod communities. Where, because we had our map editors for StarCraft, StarCraft II and Warcraft III, and really had these vibrant kind of map making / mod communities there. And, there was a lot of crap, and it sometimes was hard to find good games as a player. And it has all the same hallmarks of this, but even with a lot less of tools out there to help with discoverability. Because in those communities, if you're just a player and you're looking for content, I mean, there's no way to search, there's no way to look for lists. I mean, if your map doesn't rise to the top, then, you're kind of SOL. But you still saw people do inventive things. You still saw people kind of advertise for their maps. You saw people come up with websites. But I think, the reality is if you're one of those indie developers that is trying to get onto Steam and get noticed, you certainly need to work on the game, you need to work on the game mechanics, and you need to do something that stands out and is interesting. It's either better than something else in the genre or it's unique in some way. I mean, that's all true. But I think that the real reality now is you have to be thinking about other things as well. You need to take responsibility for discoverability a bit more into your own hands. You have to value things like marketing and building a community and really talking about self and talking about your games. And I think that's not something that game developers in general want to do or are good at, but I think it becomes much more important kind of in light of all this content that's up on a lot of these platforms.
Cool, thank you.
Did you want to do him next?
Oh, I think these might be the last two. I don't know.
Yeah, the last two questions.
Yeah, so you both wait your turn.
You go ahead, man.
You guys are so nice.
So nice, fair players.
I know I'm going to get to ask my question, so no big deal.
He just wants to be last, so you can.
That's cool too.
He wants to ask the best question.
Oh, I'm going to fail.
So in a game like StarCraft, where there's so many different units with unique abilities and unique races, and a whole community of players that are trying to figure out ways to, or unique new ways to use units. I'm just wondering, what is the process by which you design and balance new units and races in these games?
Yeah, so it's an awesome question. I could probably do a class on that one. So the first thing that I really did at Blizzard was work on StarCraft and mainly focus on game balance. Like that was, definitely one of my loves when it pertains to game design is kind of the whole sub area of game balance itself, because it's, I don't know, I really find it super fun and interesting, and how to balance the game in a way that makes it more fun and balanced and not necessarily just makes everything mediocre. So I don't know if there's an easy answer to it, but I can tell you some of the different things that I think about. One of them is, you do have to have a bit of understanding of math and analytics, since chances are you're going to be working in the spreadsheet a lot. So what I would usually do is I would work with one of my programmers that was even better at math than I am. Like I feel like I know enough math to be dangerous and I can get around, but some of my software engineers are like math geniuses. So what I do is like I have the lead programmer in StarCraft. He would, I'd say, hey, Bob, here's the spreadsheet. Make everything balanced mathematically as best as you can. And then I kind of felt like that gave me a good foundation base. And then after that, kind of all rules were off, because it really became a much more intuitive process after that. For me, personally, I've always felt like if you're going to be the guy balancing the game, you need to be a very, very good player at that game. You don't have to be the best player, but you have to be very, very good, because I really believe when it comes to like game balance of a competitive game, you're really balancing for your top players, and everything else trickles down out of that. Because honestly, when you look at like kind of the more novice players or intermediate players, 90% of the time or more, they're not even really feeling true game balance. I mean, they may feel like the other side had some overpowered unit, but it's probably more of a skill differential deficit is really what's happening. So I generally always aim my balance at kind of your elite players. But with one caveat, like sometimes elite players have techniques or abilities or ways to use units in ways that if you have less than 300 actions per minute, you can't do. So you do have to be aware that sometimes that they can do things that the lower players can't. But for the most part, I aim the balance kind of at those players. Be able to play the game really well, watch lots of replays, and really understand the nuances of your game. Like a lot of times I see people that are balancing games, they really just want to adjust things at a really basic level. They're adjusting damage or damage per second or armor or hit points, which are, the meat and potatoes of kind of your game balance paradigm. But oftentimes where you really find things is you find something like, oh, this unit actually accelerates a little bit faster than this other unit, or this unit has, a hitbox that allows it to get surrounded by zerglings, or, like sometimes you'll find that stuff, and that's the stuff that's not going to show up in the math or in the spreadsheet in a way. Like that's only the stuff you're going to uncover through playing the game and being intuitive and watching a lot of replays and talking to players and really understanding the game. So I don't know how helpful that was, but that's just, some ideas and thoughts.
I have other follow-up questions, but that would be for another time. But thank you.
Okay.
So I just jammed out a local multiplayer game that, let's call it a platform fighter.
Okay.
And the local multiplayer portion is, well, it's all the game is right now, and it seems to be a very entertaining fit for players. And the game itself is a little on the simple side. I saw Karate Champ come up in your presentation. I was like, yes, someone who knows that simple can be fun. I know that people are going to want us to take it to online multiplayer, and I'm really concerned that though the game is very competitive, the joy of play will be lost, in particular because our game is built around a one-hit kill structure and built around matches where the rounds are very short. And I thought I would ask if you had any suggestions on how do we keep the play rich, transitioning from a game that's really good at local multiplayer, or I think really good at least, and getting it into online multiplayer.
Well, I guess I'm going to ask another question in return, is just what are you scared about? Because if it's already on local multiplayer, it sounds like you're probably mostly playing with friends and people you know.
Mm-hmm.
So is that the issue, is that you're afraid of what it's going to be like when you're playing anonymous people on the internet?
Yeah, I think my concern is there's the play can feel very abrupt, which is fine when I can draw it out socially. But if I'm not seeing the other guy, like the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat, is way more fun when it's social. But the game doesn't seem to lend itself to that, at least not yet.
So, but I'm still curious, I guess. So are you worried then? So it doesn't seem like it's a problem for the winner. Like the winner, they get the headshot or whatever, and it's awesome. You're just worried that maybe the loser doesn't understand why they lost, or it just, wow, that game was just cheap headshot and I was out, or is that?
Or perhaps the skill imbalance of the game for a new player would be too much.
Yeah, so a couple thoughts on that. One thing is matchmaking and skill rating is going to be really critical for you. That was something that we certainly saw in the RTS games. When we made Warcraft III, it really became a huge thing for us to start developing a matchmaking system. Back then, I think it was much more difficult than I think now, because now there's a lot more kind of learning and thoughts around it, and you look at Microsoft's True Skill system and stuff like that. But I think matchmaking is going to be really critical for you. And then the other thing is try to find ways that new players understand why they lost, and that can be really challenging in what you're doing. But I'll give you like an FPS example. It's like one of the reasons why I think you see a lot of replay cams in FPSs, because if you just get headshotted by some dude on the roof, the play experience is I just died out of nowhere. I was like full health and now I died and I was sitting in a room. But then you see the replay and you see the guy was on the roof and shot you through a window and you're like, oh, okay, now I get it. I think that's really important for kind of those abrupt kill games, is try to find a way that you're teaching those new players that even though they lost, it was a skill differential, or they pulled off this really incredible move. So next time, hopefully, they're inspired to kind of do better, or at least they took something away from the loss.
Cool. That helps. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for asking the very interesting questions, and thank Rob for sharing his knowledge with our community and helping you to be more successful. But there's one question that we still have, I think. What's next for Rob?
Oh, you didn't tell me you were going to ask that question. I don't know if I have any great new news to report on that, other than the fact that, the idea of this whole Unity World Tour really came out of trying to figure out the answer to that question. I'd met John Riccatello, the beginning of last year or so, and he'd gone through a very long transition after he had left Electronic Arts and before he signed on to Unity full time. And I was kind of just talking to him about his experience doing that, and he'd spent a lot, some time doing some advisory board stuff, helping some other people form companies, because he's a really accomplished entrepreneur. And for me, what I was doing was I was spending time visiting, friends in the industry, and I honestly a little bit in some of the other industries too, because I know people in music and movies and tech, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, and I really wanted to take my time kind of seeing what was out there and talking to folks and where people think the industry's going. And that's one of the things I think's been really great on the Unity side, because JR's like, well, why don't you go and visit a bunch of Unity developers? Because it's this whole area of the industry that I'm very superficially aware of, from a Blizzard standpoint. Blizzard, I know one area of the industry, big AAA PC games, online multiplayer, so I knew that world well. But what I've been very excited about is seeing, all the creativity that's in the independent gaming community, and having the opportunity to kind of do this tour and hang out with Carl a bunch and meet a whole bunch of people and talk to you guys. Like, I've just been in learning mode. So, but I will say, it's don't have any immediate plans, but I'm starting to get antsy. I'm starting to have some ideas now. I'm starting to feel like there's some cool things to do in the gaming industry still. And a lot of it is really just being inspired by all the people I've been meeting and talking to.
So 2017 we can download, or 2016?
Ship date of my next game is...
You have any keys already to give out? Thank you so much, Rob. And thank you, and we will be walking around here, so see you around.